Hello, I'm Jason Sullivan of Rathbone Group, and on this video of On Subrogation, we're going to talk about the situation when there may be a potential recovery by a subrogated insurer from another insurance carrier who also insures the loss. Confusing, right? What exactly does that mean? Well, let's make it a little simpler. I'm a driver, and I have an insurance policy that covers me. It provides liability coverage, and I own a car. So I have coverage for me in my car. I lend the car to my friend Nate, who drives, and unfortunately, Nate's not a good driver. He gets into an accident and causes damages to somebody else. Now, Nate also has an insurance policy that covers him as a driver. So now we have one collision and damage to a third party that's potentially covered by two insurance carriers. One, me, the owner of the vehicle, and two, Nate, the driver of the vehicle. So in a case where my insurance company steps up and pays the claim, they pay all the damages for the liability, and now they say, well, that's not really fair. Nate's insurer should also be pursued and have to share in this. Frequently, insurers will talk about it when the first claim is submitted, and they'll say, okay, we'll pay this much, you pay this much, and there's an agreement beforehand and everything goes well. Sometimes that doesn't happen, and one carrier just refuses to respond or isn't willing to pay anything at all. The other carrier wants to protect their insured, so they step in and they pay the claim. But they don't want to have to bear the full responsibility and think that that other carrier should be paid back. So knowing that's the scenario that this arises in, what are the options when you are the carrier that's gone ahead and paid the liability claim but thinks that another carrier should owe the responsibility? It's really going to depend upon what the policy language is. And a lot of times you'll see these referred to as concurrent coverage cases or dual coverage cases or a primary, secondary, or excess policy issue. So let's break down what the primary, secondary, or excess policy issue. In most of your insurance policies, you're going to address what happens if there is other insurance or dual insurance or concurrent coverage for one singular loss. A lot of policies might read, we are primary unless there's other insurance available, and then we're secondary. Now, what if my policy says that? And what if Nate's policy says that? So my policy is willing to pay primary unless there's other insurance. Nate's policy is willing to pay unless there's other insurance. If you take that to the very end, neither insurer is going to pay because there is other insurance. And the law does not think that's fair. So a lot of states have cases or statutes that go ahead and say, here's how we're going to handle this. And generally what the courts look at are, do the two policies cancel each other out? If the policies cancel each other out, from a public policy perspective, the court and the law just does not want that to happen. And so a frequent outcome is the courts will say, well, the carriers have to share the loss pro rata. So if you say there's no coverage if there's another policy, and you say there's no coverage if there's another policy, or your excess or your secondary, and that means now nobody's going to cover the liability, each carrier is going to take on a pro rata share of that. So if you're a carrier who's paid a loss and think that there's concurrent coverage with maybe the driver's policy, that's where you want to approach and find out what's their policy language say. Does it set forth a primary, secondary, or excess? Now, it can get a little confusing because sometimes there's language in a policy that says, we will cover in these circumstances, but not these. And it's in both policy languages, but they don't really cancel each other out. In those cases, if they don't really cancel each other out, it's less likely for the court to say there's a pro rata. They're going to look at the policy language that says it's going to cover the loss, and if the other one would cover the loss, but it's not just a negative that they cancel each other out, they're not going to look to that secondary carrier to pay the claim. The other area to look for is, what if there's no coverage? So you, insurance carrier, pays out the liability claim, and you think that Nate has insurance coverage. But Nate doesn't have insurance coverage, or there's an exclusion under his policy that says there's no coverage at all under these circumstances. These can be especially frustrating when another carrier has policy language that's more restrictive on what types of losses they will pay or claims that they'll consider covered under the policy. In those cases, even if it was covered under your own policy, that other carrier may have a valid argument that there's no coverage under their policy. And in those cases, now you don't have a concurrent or dual coverage issue. You have your policy that covered the loss and now an uninsured motorist. And generally, you're not going to be able to go after that driver because they were already covered, insured under your policy. And when that's the case, most states bar subrogation against your own insured. So Nate, whose policy is just going to abandon him, is still covered under your policy, so there's no right to pursue him directly. These claims can get a little muddled, but if you break it down to what's the basis of the claim, am I looking at a case that there's dual coverage and we think that they owe, then you really have to analyze the policy language in each policy, figure out if they cancel each other out, or how the state law is going to handle them if they don't cancel each other out, and then figure out, is it a pro rata or is one going to be primary or secondary to the other. Certainly paying the claim is the right decision to make because it takes care of your policyholder and potentially avoids a lawsuit against them. But anytime that you can recover that money from another insurance carrier who really should be stepping in to pay under the terms of their policy, it's always good to look for that opportunity and pursue those claims. For On Subrogation, I'm Jason Sullivan, and that's the long and short of it.